I used to believe that I was a rational person, making decisions based on logic and having full control over my emotions. But then one day, I was startled to realize that some of the thoughts in my head were not ones I had chosen to think. The choices I believed were conscious were, in fact, guided by invisible hands, subtle strings being pulled in my brain without my awareness. They did not arrive like a storm, but slipped in quietly like a breath. You think you are making your own decisions, but how much of them truly belong to you? Or are they simply reactions, the result of mental traps pre-programmed since before you even knew you were learning how to think? I am going to tell you about 21 of those invisible traps, thinking errors that seem small but quietly shape the way you judge, act, love, hate, and even see yourself. They cannot be erased, they cannot be uninstalled, but there is one thing you can do. Recognize them when they appear and choose not to let them control you. I am not here to teach you how to think, but to remind you of one thing: you can still take back control, but only if you are brave enough to look directly at the things you have never questioned. I once wondered why people are so good at deceiving themselves. Then I realized that one of the mind's most sophisticated traps is cognitive dissonance. It is not loud or violent, but soft, like a whisper. I don't really need that. I never truly wanted it anyway. We often use it like a coat to cover the feeling of failure, just like the fox in Aesop's fable, who looked up at a ripe cluster of grapes he could not reach, walked away, and told himself they were probably sour. The truth was, the fox wanted the grapes, but his ego could not bear to admit that he had failed. You and I are no different. When we do not get what we want, we have three choices: try harder, accept that we are not good enough yet, or bend our beliefs to avoid facing the truth. Most of us choose the third option because it is quick, less painful, and allows us to feel that we are still fine. But the cost is that we bury ourselves in stories that are not real. Think about the time you were rejected for a job. You could accept that the other candidate was better, but instead you told yourself, that job wasn't that great anyway. The boss seemed too strict. The company was unprofessional. Or when you deeply desire wealth but carry the belief that rich people are all greedy and corrupt, you are torn between two conflicting beliefs, and that silent tension gradually wears down your emotions, even leading to depression. That is the power of cognitive dissonance. It shields you from uncomfortable truths, but it also robs you of the chance to face them, learn, and grow. I was once that clever fox. I skillfully built fences of excuses so I wouldn't have to admit that I wasn't good enough. But one day, I realized that no story I told myself would ever bring me closer to my own grapes. Rolf Dobelli once said, "You can play the clever fox your whole life, but you will never get the grapes." To break this trap, you must be brave enough to choose between two things: either truly act to achieve what you want, or honestly remove it from your goals. If you do not choose, you will live in invisible torment, lulling yourself into thinking you are fine, while in reality, you remain stuck. I share this not to make you feel guilty, but to help you see the power of a deliberate response. You cannot erase cognitive dissonance from your brain, but you can recognize it and decide, this time, I will not run away. And if you can do that, you will begin to see yourself becoming freer, stronger, and truly in control of the direction of your life. Do you want to keep writing? You think you are living true to yourself, but how much of that is just a story you made up to ease the pain? We are at our smartest when we manage to deceive ourselves, but the price is higher than you think. Are you willing to strip away every excuse and face the raw truth about yourself? There was a time in my life when I lived as if the whole world was watching my every move. Being 5 minutes late to a meeting, I imagined everyone checking their watches and glancing my way. The first time I walked into a gym, I felt like every eye was scrutinizing my clumsy movements. Even a tiny splash of tomato sauce on my shirt at a party made my face flush, convinced that the entire room had noticed. But then I realized that was not the truth. It was the spotlight effect, a mental stage light our brain creates. It tricks us into thinking we are the center of attention when in reality, everyone else is too busy with their own lives to truly notice us. When you live under the spotlight effect, you trap yourself in a self-imposed frame. Every gesture, every word must be perfect because you believe everyone is watching and judging you. This doesn't just exhaust you, it robs you of the freedom to experience, make mistakes, and learn. A friend of mine once skipped the chance to speak in front of a crowd because he thought his voice sounded weird and people would laugh. But when I asked the attendees later, no one had noticed. They didn't even remember what he was wearing that day. The truth is, you are not as important in other people's eyes as you think. It may sound harsh, but it is a kind of freedom. When you realize that most people are focused on their own story, you feel lighter. You walk into a room not as someone being judged, but as someone simply living authentically. Once I understood this, I started doing the things I had once feared. I asked stupid questions in class, wore clothes I loved even if they weren't on trend, and laughed out loud when I felt joy. And strangely enough, no one reacted the way I had imagined. The world didn't change my perspective of it did. The spotlight effect will not disappear because it is a natural brain response to protect our self-image. But you can recognize it and choose a different reaction. Next time you feel like everyone's watching, ask yourself, do they really care about me that much? Or is this just a light I turned on myself? The answer might surprise you. If you've ever felt this way, share your story in the comments. You might just help someone realize they've been over-scrutinizing themselves too. And if what I said makes you want to see the world a little lighter, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep this journey going. Do you want to keep writing? Maybe you've been living your whole life under a light that you were the one to turn on. You think everyone's paying attention to you, but the truth is, no one has that much free time. Would you dare walk into a crowded room and believe no one cares about you as much as you think? I once walked into a car negotiation feeling fully prepared. I thought I was alert, well-informed, and would not be swayed. But the moment the seller gave me their first price much higher than I had expected, I found myself comparing every subsequent figure to that initial number. That was when I realized I had been pulled down by the anchoring effect. An anchor in thinking is any initial piece of information, whether random or intentional, that has the power to lock your mind to a starting point and make you judge everything based on it. In my case, the high initial price made every discount afterward seem like a bargain, even though the final price was still far above the car's true value. The dangerous thing is that anchors do not always come from others. Sometimes you set them for yourself. You might guess the population of a country based on the number you just heard about a different country. You might estimate how long a task will take based on a vague memory from the last time you did it. You might define your self-worth based on a comment made years ago. In a famous experiment, experienced judges in Germany, each with over 15 years on the bench, were asked to read a description of a petty theft case. They then rolled a loaded pair of dice, which could only land on 3 or 9, and were asked to hand down a sentence. Those who rolled a 9 gave an average sentence of 8 months. Those who rolled a 3 gave just 5 months. Completely random numbers were enough to pull their judgment toward them. Now imagine how this plays out in daily life. The salary from your first job shaping how you view future career opportunities. A store's listed price framing your sense of a product's value. The first number someone mentions in a deal influencing the outcome, no matter how objective you think you are. The anchoring effect is dangerous because it is silent. You do not feel yourself being influenced. Your brain believes it is analyzing facts, when in reality, it is adjusting every fact around a starting figure that has already been planted. The only way to limit the power of an anchor is to prepare your own starting point before entering any situation where you might be influenced. If you are buying a house, determine a fair price based on your independent research before hearing the seller's offer. If you are negotiating salary, set your desired figure beforehand and stick to it instead of being pulled toward the employer's first number. And most importantly, recognize when an anchor is being thrown at you, especially if it comes from an irrelevant or random source. Anchors are not always bad. Sometimes you can deliberately use them to your advantage, but you need to know who is holding the rope, you or someone else. Otherwise, you will be making decisions not based on reality, but on a starting point that should never have existed in the first place. There is a truth that took me years to realize. The way you see a person can be distorted by nothing more than your first impression. This is the halo effect. It works quietly, like a tinted lens over your eyes, making you magnify the first strength you notice and blur out everything else. I remember meeting a man for the first time at a conference. He was confident, articulate, and well-dressed. Within minutes, I'd built a whole story in my mind. This is a trustworthy person, highly capable, surely a decent human being. Months later, when I had the chance to work with him, I discovered he was irresponsible and at times took advantage of others. Strangely, even when the truth was right in front of me, a part of me still held on to that initial bias, still wanting to believe in the image I had first created. That is the dangerous power of the halo effect. It makes your brain do everything it can to protect the beautiful story it started with. You see a student from a prestigious school and immediately assume she is intelligent, hardworking, and morally sound. You see someone with an attractive appearance and automatically believe they are friendly and trustworthy. You read a few impressive accomplishments on a candidate's resume and assume they will excel in every area. The story of Bernie Madoff is a perfect example. He was praised as a Wall Street investment legend. His success and reputation created a massive halo that hid every warning sign until the largest Ponzi scheme in history was exposed. The halo effect shows up not only in business or politics, but in the smallest details. In the classroom, if a teacher gives you a high score on the first test, there's a good chance they will continue to view your future work positively, even if the quality declines. In the workplace, the opinion of the first person to speak, especially if they are in a position of authority, can set a trajectory that shapes the entire discussion, even if that initial information is inaccurate. What makes the halo effect so dangerous is that it cleverly disguises itself as intuition. You believe you are seeing the truth, but in reality, you are looking through a lens already tinted. And this lens doesn't just blur the truth, it prolongs the distortion over time. To break free from this effect, you must be willing to separate each piece of information and evaluate it on its own, without letting a single factor overshadow the entire picture. Train yourself to ask, if I didn't know this one thing, would I still judge them the same way? In meetings, collect individual opinions before group discussions so that initial impressions don't dictate the entire process. The halo effect will not vanish just because you are aware of it. But once you can recognize it, you will see more clearly who is truly in front of you, not the version illuminated by the glow of first impressions, but the real person with both strengths and flaws. And when that happens, you will begin making decisions that are fairer, wiser, and far less likely to lead to regret. I once sat at a roulette table in a Las Vegas casino, watching the ball spin and land on black once, twice, 3 times, then 4 times in a row. And instantly a voice in my head said, "The next one has to be red." That is the gambler's fallacy, the illusion of the gambler. We believe in some mystical balance of the universe, that past results somehow influence the next outcome. But the truth is, the roulette wheel doesn't remember what just happened. A coin doesn't keep a record of its flips. Dice don't care how many times you've rolled a 6. Every spin, every flip, every roll is an independent event with the exact same probability as before. It sounds simple, but it's exactly that simplicity that makes the brain resist. Humans hate pure randomness. We crave patterns, wanting to believe that everything has logic and cycles. That craving makes us easy prey for this trap. And it's not just in gambling. Gambler's fallacy sneaks into places you wouldn't expect. You're taking a multiple choice test. Notice you've picked C 3 times in a row and hesitate thinking, this one can't be C again. You're a judge reviewing asylum applications, and because the last two were approved, you unconsciously lean toward rejecting the next one, even though the criteria haven't changed. You're evaluating loan applications and are influenced by the last two decisions you made without even realizing it. A University of Chicago study found that even people trained to make independent decisions can easily fall into this pattern. That's because our brain doesn't just process information, it constantly seeks balance to create a sense of control. When results tilt heavily to one side, the brain flashes a warning. It's about to swing the other way. But here's the danger. That signal isn't based on reality, it's based on a story we invented. The only way to break free from this illusion is to remind yourself over and over that each event is independent. The last coin flip can't affect the next one. The decision you just made shouldn't shape your next decision unless new, specific, and relevant information is introduced. And if you're in a long sequence of decisions, treat each case as separate, evaluating it as if it were the only one, not a link in a chain. The truth is, the balance you think you see exists only in your imagination. And that imagination can cost you money, make you miss opportunities, or lead you to bad decisions simply because you believed in a rule that doesn't exist. Sometimes, clarity doesn't come from predicting the next result, but from accepting that you don't need to. Every decision, every choice, every action, let it stand on its own, free from the shadow of what just happened. That's when you're truly in control, not chasing an illusion of balance that was never real. I once stood in a luxury car showroom, looking at the price tag of my dream car and feeling overwhelmed. Then the salesperson smiled and mentioned a leather seat upgrade for just $3,000. Suddenly, it felt reasonable. $3,000 no longer seemed like a large amount when placed next to $80,000 for the car itself. That is the contrast effect. When the brain compares two things, it doesn't evaluate their absolute value. It bases the judgment on the difference between them. This comparison can easily make you inflate or downplay the value of something simply because of what it is placed next to. In shopping, the contrast effect is a salesperson's favorite tool. They put a $150 shirt right at the entrance so that the $50 shirt inside feels like a bargain. They show you a $15,000 watch first, then present a $5,000 model as if you've just saved a fortune. But this effect isn't limited to purchases. It appears in how you evaluate people, opportunities, and even yourself. You meet an exceptional candidate first, and the next one, though, highly capable, appears less impressive. You tour a terrible apartment, and the next one, though, far from perfect, makes you want to sign immediately. Contrast creates the illusion of value and clouds objective judgment. Worse, the contrast effect can distort your standards of living. If you are surrounded by people who earn more, spend more, and own more, you may start feeling like what you have is insufficient, even when it is more than enough. On the flip side, if you compare yourself to those less fortunate, you might overlook important growth goals simply because you feel already fine. The truth is, the contrast effect isn't always bad. In some situations, it helps you perceive differences more clearly and make quicker choices. But if you let it lead entirely, you lose the ability to judge based on the true nature of things. So, how do you escape this trap? First, learn to separate an item from the context it's being compared to. If you're considering a purchase, don't ask, how does it compare to that one? Instead, ask, is it truly worth its own price? If you are evaluating a person, don't compare them to the one you met just before. Assess them independently, using standards you set beforehand. And most importantly, don't let your environment define your sense of satisfaction. The value of a thing or a person doesn't lie in whether it's better or worse than what's next to it, but in whether it is truly suitable, necessary, and aligned with your goals. When you learn to see everything for its own value, you become less swayed by comparisons that distort your perception. You make decisions based on your own standards, not on what someone cleverly places beside it to change your mind. And that is when you truly take ownership of your choices. I once believed I was an objective person. I read the news, sought out information, and thought I was seeing things from multiple perspectives. But then I realized that most of what I read, watched, and believed were simply the things I had already wanted to believe. That is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out, remember, and give more weight to information that supports your existing beliefs while ignoring or quickly forgetting anything that contradicts them. The brain loves the feeling of being right. When it finds a piece of evidence that aligns with your thinking, you feel reassured and satisfied. But when it encounters a conflicting truth, it creates discomfort. Instead of facing it, you automatically downplay its importance or look for ways to dismiss it. This isn't because you are deliberately lying to yourself, but because the brain is wired to maintain psychological stability. The cost of that stability, however, is a narrowed perspective. Someone who believes the real estate market only goes up will hunt for every statistic that proves it, ignoring warning signs of a downturn. Someone who thinks all successful entrepreneurs are dishonest will easily notice negative stories, but rarely pay attention to examples of integrity. And in the age of social media, confirmation bias doesn't just exist, it is actively fed. Algorithms keep showing you posts, videos, and opinions that match your worldview, turning your feed into an echo chamber where everyone repeats what you already believe. The danger is that the more you hear something repeated, the more likely you are to accept it as truth, regardless of whether it is true. Daniel Kahneman once said, "A reliable way to make people believe in falsehoods is frequent repetition." How? When you only hear one side, you don't just lose opportunities to learn, you also become more extreme in your views. You struggle to listen to someone with a different opinion because everything in you is primed to push back immediately. The only way to broaden your perspective is to deliberately seek out information from diverse sources, especially those you disagree with. Instead of looking for reasons to prove yourself right, try to find evidence that challenges your beliefs. Ask yourself, if what I believe is wrong, what proof would I need to change my mind? And when you encounter conflicting information, don't dismiss it outright. Keep it, analyze it, and see if it holds any merit. This is not easy. It requires stepping out of your mental comfort zone and embracing the discomfort. But that very discomfort is a sign that you are learning something new. Confirmation bias will always be there. You can't eliminate it entirely, but you can weaken its grip with awareness and the habit of self-questioning. When you build this skill, you are no longer trapped within the walls of your own beliefs. Instead, you stand at a higher vantage point, able to see the bigger picture and make decisions based on the full truth, not just the part you like to hear. I remember the first time I bought a new car. For the entire week afterward, I started seeing that same model everywhere on my commute to work, in parking lots, even right outside my favorite restaurant. Before that, I had barely noticed it. I thought to myself, could this car suddenly be trending? But in reality, it wasn't. That was the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, also known as the frequency illusion. When you've just noticed or learned something new, you begin spotting it more often and mistakenly believe it's appearing more frequently. The reason is simple. Before, your brain didn't assign any special value to that information, so it slipped past your attention. Once it makes it onto your mental priority list, your brain automatically scans your surroundings for matching signs. You learn a new word and suddenly hear it in conversations, read it on billboards, and see it in articles. You take an interest in a shoe brand and suddenly feel like it's everywhere. The truth is, these things were always there, you just weren't looking. The Baader-Meinhof effect is amplified by two other factors. The recency effect, which makes your brain overvalue the importance of recent events, and confirmation bias, which drives you to keep searching for proof that something is changing. The danger is that if you don't understand this phenomenon, you might fall into the trap of believing the universe is sending me a sign or this is a signal. This is why many people believe in purposeful coincidences or see signs to justify a decision they already wanted to make. In reality, Our brains are pattern recognition machines. They filter through millions of pieces of information each day, holding on to only what aligns with what you care about or worry about at the moment. That's useful because it helps you focus. But when left unchecked, it can trick you into believing the world is changing around you when all that's changed is your own perception. The way to stay clear-headed in the face of the Baader-Meinhof effect is to ask, is this actually happening more often, or am I just noticing it now? Try tracking how often the event occurs over a longer period. You'll often find that what you thought was a spike is really just selective attention. Understanding this phenomenon doesn't take away the excitement of discovering something new. On the contrary, it helps you appreciate the experience without being fooled by the feeling that it's everywhere. You can enjoy the thrill of learning something new while staying aware that the world hasn't suddenly changed. It's you who has just expanded your awareness. And once you realize this, you'll be less likely to rush into decisions based solely on a sign you stumbled upon, and more likely to seek out real, reliable evidence instead. That's how you turn curiosity into power without letting it lead you into beautiful but untrue stories. There are nights when I lie awake, eyes wide open in the dark, not because of noise or a late cup of coffee, but because of an unfinished task looping endlessly in my mind, an email that needs a reply, a phone call that needs to be made, a half-finished plan sitting on my desk. The thought just won't leave me alone. That's the Zeigarnik effect, the phenomenon where the mind tends to remember unfinished tasks far more vividly than completed ones. Our brains hate incompleteness. They treat every task like an open door, constantly reminding you to close it. That's why you might easily forget a meeting that just ended, but vividly remember a project you left hanging last week. At first, researchers believed the only way to escape this mental tension was to finish the task. But later studies discovered something fascinating. Simply creating a clear plan for completion can be enough for the brain to relax and stop pushing you to think about it. I tried this myself and saw immediate results. One night, before going to bed, I quickly wrote down 3 unfinished tasks along with the first steps to tackle each one the next day. To my surprise, my mind felt lighter and I fell asleep without that restless feeling haunting me. The problem is, we often let unfinished tasks drift around in our heads, taking up mental space and reducing our ability to focus on the present. They distract you in conversations, make you restless during downtime, and leave you mentally drained even when you're doing nothing. The Zeigarnik effect doesn't just create pressure, it can also trap you in procrastination. You keep telling yourself, I'll do it later, but each time you think about it, it feels heavier and harder to start. And so the cycle repeats. Breaking free from this loop isn't just about rushing to finish everything sometimes. That's not realistic. It's about learning to close those open doors in your mind with a concrete plan. If you can't do it right away, write down when, how, and what the next step will be. When your brain knows the task has a destination, it dials down the alerts and lets you focus on other things. But this also requires honesty with yourself. Don't jot down a fake plan just to ease your mind and then ignore it. When you commit, follow through. Trust in yourself is built every time you do exactly what you promised, even if the promise is only to yourself. I've learned that freeing your mind from these open doors doesn't just relieve pressure, it creates space for creativity and for enjoying the present moment. When your thoughts are no longer scattered by fragments of unfinished work, you have more energy for what truly matters. And in the long run, that's what elevates the quality of your life to an entirely new level. I once found myself in a large supermarket, standing in front of a shelf packed with dozens of jars of jam in every flavor imaginable. At first, I felt excited, but within minutes, the excitement faded and was replaced by confusion. I couldn't decide which flavor to pick. In the end, I walked away empty-handed. That's the paradox of choice. We tend to believe that the more options we have, the better. because it gives us the chance to find the perfect one. But in reality, once the number of choices passes a certain point, the brain becomes overloaded. Instead of feeling free, we feel pressured, anxious, and even paralyzed. In a famous study, when a supermarket displayed 24 types of jam, it attracted more shoppers, but only 3% actually made a purchase. When they displayed just 6 types, the number of buyers increased by 10 times. Why? Because fewer choices made it easier for people to compare, decide, and feel satisfied with their decision. Too many options not only slow down the decision-making process, but also make you more likely to regret your choice afterward. When there are many alternatives, you can't help but think about the ones you didn't choose and wonder, did I miss out on something better? This lingering regret can erode your satisfaction, even if what you chose is genuinely good. In modern life, the paradox of choice is everywhere from picking what to eat, buying clothes, choosing a career, to finding a life partner. Dating apps with hundreds of profiles to swipe through make you feel like you're swimming in opportunity, but that abundance makes it harder to commit to one person because there's always the thought, what if there's someone better? When you can't decide or take too long to decide, you lose the chance to fully enjoy the outcome of your choice. The solution isn't to give up the right to choose, but to learn to limit it intentionally. Before you walk into a supermarket, decide you'll only consider a maximum of 3 products. Before opening a dating app, set a time or profile limit for the day. When making a big decision, narrow your list down to only the options that truly meet your needs, not the ones that just sound nice. And more importantly, once you've chosen, learn to accept and value that choice instead of constantly looking back, not because you know it's the absolute best, but because it's good enough for you at that moment. Life doesn't always require the perfect option, but it does require you to be decisive and fully commit to what you've chosen. When you know how to set limits, you feel lighter, more focused, and more able to enjoy the results. You stop chasing a vague best and start living fully with the right choice for you. And that's how you turn the power of choice into strength, rather than letting it become a burden that drags you down. We've just journeyed together through some of the most subtle traps the human mind can set. Each effect, each bias, is not just dry psychology. It's a mirror reflecting how we see the world, others, and ourselves. What matters is not how many names you can remember, but that you begin to notice when they appear in your own life, so that instead of reacting on autopilot, you can choose a deliberate response. Change doesn't happen overnight. It demands persistence, honesty with yourself, and the courage to face what is uncomfortable. But every small step you take today, a pause to think before reacting, a moment to ask, is this really true, will add up to a stronger, freer version of yourself. Thank you for spending this time walking alongside me on this journey. I hope what you've heard today doesn't stop at curiosity, but becomes action, no matter how small, that helps you take ownership of your thoughts, your emotions, and your life. I wish you and those you love health, peace, and the clarity to live a life led by your own